Within a couple of weeks of this going up, I had a woman come in, and she, this is one of those stories I always tell because it's such a pinnacle moment in my career. She came in, tiny woman, very small, petite, tiniest baby ever. This baby was like this big. She was super petite. So one of the first things I always do is I always ask my client, how did you hear about us? Everybody gets asked that if they're a new client. So even if it's written down, I ask because it's good feedback. So I turned to her and I said, oh, by the way, how did you hear about our studio? And she said, oh, she said, you know what? I had her at PSL and I saw your work. It was just beautiful. So of course, this was in the first few weeks of having this display up. So my heart's kind of racing because I'm like, oh, that's great. And I turned to her and I said, oh, really? I said, well, what did you think of the display? And she said, she almost acted it out. She looked at me, she said, you know what, Sandy? She said, I have to tell you something. My labor and delivery was the single worst thing I've ever done in my life. She said, I had I think it was like 24 hours of labor at home before they would admit me. And then she said, once I was admitted to the hospital, I went through a series of problems, 18 hours of serious labor before the baby went into a stress. And they had to take me in for an emergency C-section. I was unable to deliver her naturally. And she said, I will never do this again. She said, this baby is a miracle as far as I'm concerned, and I will never have another child. And she said, but I have to tell you this. She said, when I was there, I was in so much pain. And she said, I just didn't think I was going to survive. And she said, I kept walking around the circle, she called it. She said, I kept walking around the circle and I'm pulling my IV, and she said, I kept looking at these images, and she said, I stopped at every single picture. Darn it. She said, I stopped at every single picture and I would just stare at those pictures. And all I kept thinking is, even if I don't make it, I just want this baby to be healthy. I just want a baby like the baby in these pictures. And she said, your work is what got me through. She said, it was so much pain, but I kept going around and looking at your images and looking at your images. And she said, finally, I turned to my husband and I said, if I survive this, you're buying me one of those. It was so funny because I was like, oh my gosh. She literally caused me, she scared me when she said that, but it was like, that's an impact moment for me because as animated as she was about that, she was telling me that she literally threatened his life. She was going to get a picture because she was suffering and he was the reason, and she was getting this. So for me, it was cool because for me, I went through that emotional journey of seeing her in this circle, looking at my work, connecting to those babies, connecting to that. I also saw her go through that emotional journey of making the determination that this was important to her and that she was going to have one of those for herself. And so that was it. With that, I got it. I was so locked into the hospital concept. That's when I got into that, holy cow, we got to take over the world.